Colours and Forgiveness, Episode 3. The boat rocked violently, and a large splurge of water landed on Lucy's white trousers. The skipper grinned at Lucy, and she noticed his remaining tooth swinging as he sat propped against the end of the boat. One arm stretched along the edge, the other arm nonchalantly steering his tiny craft across the turbulent stretch of water. They were exactly midway now, the larger Isle of Mull too far to swim if they capsized. Thomas was staring ahead to the shore of Iona. Lucy took her momentary fear in hand and followed his eyes. Iona approached fast, and as another wave swept into the boat, she sensed her excitement deep in her belly. Why she had worn white trousers, who on earth knew, she thought. She'd done boats once upon a time. Her 22 years of age feeling 72 all of a sudden. Then the boat scraped, and they were ashore. "Mind your pretty trousers, lassie," cried the skipper, as his curved back moved fast out of the boat to stand on the pebble shore in one fluid movement. Her trousers were smeared with green and grey as she stood up. She brushed her bottom with her hand and grimaced. "Why didn't we catch the ferry again, Thomas?" she asked, knowing full well the ferry had been delayed due to an engine problem, and it was she who had asked in the tiny cafe, was there no way they could get to Iona that day? Roy the skipper thrust the notes Thomas passed him into his damp trousers, slid back into his small boat, dropped the engine into the water, and off he splattered, the back of his head expressing his amusement at these two impatient young folk. "Come on, Lucy," said Tom, ignoring her petulance, and he strode up the beach to the coastal path. They walked up the hill and through the village, following the signs to the monastery. As they passed the wool shop, Lucy felt a tug of old memory. Her friend Rowena pulling her into her family wool shop. Rowena. The memory stirred uneasy waters. "Lucy!" Tom was way ahead now, striding up the narrowing path. What was the matter with her today? She put her head down, focusing on the grey, crumbling path, and pushed herself on to catch him up. At the top of the hill they paused, side by side gazing in awe at the huge stone cross. Lucy was squinting up at it, camera poised, enjoying setting its towering outline against the clear blue sky. And then, without warning, the colours burst into her frame. "Oh, God," said Lucy. "What? Can you still not see them, Tom?" "What? See what?" repeated Thomas, and Lucy noticed his clenched jaw as he spoke. "Oh, never mind," she said. "No, it's okay. Are you talking about those patterns again?" "You mean the colours?" "Yes, the patterns you said you saw at home." "Yes." Lucy did not mention they'd never really gone away. Not entirely. That she was beginning to get very used to their semi-permanent presence. "What do you want me to say, Lucy?" Thomas asked. Nothing. Just forget I said anything. I'm probably going mad, aren't I?" Lucy said. Thomas smiled. "So what's new?" he said, and he put his arm around her, and they walked along the side of the hill. The blue sea sparkled to their right. Lucy took a deep breath and let her eyes absorb the beauty of this place. She'd see someone when they got home, she thought. Clearly it wasn't normal to see clouds of floating colours, and worse, to begin talking to them like a friend. She noticed the colours moved a little faster when she focused on them, as if they were listening to her thoughts. She tried to ignore them. She knew they were all over her, hitching a ride, but she couldn't see them, so she presumed they were on her back or head at this moment. Tom had entered a tiny doorway. "Just behave," she muttered to the colours, and followed him into the tiny door of the church, adjusting her eyes to its gloom. She found herself in a small room, mud floor, full of ancient artefact and stone cross. She bent down and began to read the explanations of the monks and princes who'd come here in search of something. like her, she thought. When had she begun to know she needed to visit this island? Long before the colours. After the loneliness had begun, perhaps. They explored the buildings of this tiny monastic settlement, and wandering off, Lucy sat with the stone and the thick air of lives lived, and made a prayer. She knew the colours watched. She could even feel their interest. Was that a sense of love she just felt? Was all this? "Let's go for a walk, Tom, before it gets dark," she said. "No, come on, Luce, I'm starving. We missed lunch," he said. "Let's go back to the village and find something to eat." Lucy felt her stomach rumble, but the wildness of this place beckoned her to walk out beyond the stone ruins, beyond the curve of the sea, across its tussocked fields. She could almost hear its pulse. Tom was wonderful, but there was just one thing. He had a very bad temper. She paused. The colours rose up in front of her and swirled and bunched, and their hues deepened. "I really want to walk a little, Tom," she asked. Her stomach was tense, but she was holding her ground today. She and the colours wanted to explore. The island smelt of liberation, of different ways, of beginnings and change and fresh life. She felt as if anything was possible here. Tom's brows lowered. His eyes went cold. "You never take me seriously," he said. "You always ignore what I want. You're selfish, Lucy. You dragged me up to this pile of stone, and yes, it was interesting, but I don't have your obsession with spiritual things. I came for you. I'm going back to the village, and I'm going to get myself a sandwich. I'll save you a chair. Just don't be long," he said, and he turned his back and walked off. Lucy felt her cheeks burning, and a strong desire to be anywhere but with Tom. "So we're both happy then," she said, muttering to herself, and set off through a gap in the wall to the fields. The footpath sign pointed to the left, but lost in anger, Lucy set off to the right, as the thunder clouds above began to gather. To be continued.